The P-38 Lightning was one of the most iconic planes in history, but like many other aircraft from World War II, there are very few of these magnificent planes left. In this video, we will actually take a look at a P-38 Lightning that was lost on a mission in 1942, presumably forever, until eventually it would actually be rediscovered in a frozen glacier more than 50 years later, and then finally sent back into the air. When doing the incredible amounts of research required to make these history videos, I often have to read books, and more books, and still more books. And it takes a lot of time. Fortunately, I am able to save some of this time thanks to the sponsor of this video, Blinkist. Blinkist helps you discover and understand powerful ideas from books and podcasts in a short amount of time. Basically, they take great nonfiction works on all sorts of topics and condense them into 15-minute explainers called Blinks. This is great because it allows me to learn and discover things that I normally wouldn't have time to. Lately, I have been into a few titles that they have condensed on some of my favorite history topics, with my most recent being Atomic Accidents, which covers the evolution of nuclear energy and the details of the tragic accidents along the way. So, if you want to grow your knowledge and understanding of all sorts of things in 15 minutes or less like I have, I encourage you to check out Blinkist. Use the link in the description today to get a 7-day free trial and 25% off a premium membership. Thanks again to Blinkist, and without further ado, enjoy. It is July of 1942, and just a few months earlier, the United States had been thrust into the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, as the Yankee war machine is preparing to take on both Japan and Nazi Germany, one of the first steps in making that happen is clear: getting men, machines, and supplies to the front lines to fight. The US had the luxury of being far away from both theaters of the conflict, which was ideal for protecting its homeland and the civilian populations. But it did, however, mean that they had to face more logistical challenges to bring the war to the enemy. One such example of this is the massive amounts of aircraft that had to be moved from the United States into England, named Operation Bolero. This was obviously where the US Army Air Corps would be based out of in the battle against the Luftwaffe, so thousands of aircraft had to begin making their way across the Atlantic to join the fight. One of these groups of aircraft would be 6 P-38 fighters from the 94th Fighter Squadron. These twin-engine aircraft were some of the first that were sent from the United States to join the war effort. Their journey would begin when they were assigned to leave the northeastern United States in July of 1942. They took off and all was going well, but it was a long journey and many miles to make it across the Atlantic Ocean. Their specific destination was the British Isles, a small group of islands on the northwestern side of England. But first, they would have to stop for fuel in Canada, Greenland, and Iceland along the way. Unfortunately, after they had already covered more than half of their journey, a few hours after leaving their stop in Greenland, they ran into bad weather and very low visibility as they approached Iceland. On a journey that is over the ocean with no navigation help from the ground, low visibility can often spell disaster for even a seasoned pilot. After trying to battle their way through the poor weather for some time, their fuel began to get low, and the squadron of American fighters knew that they now had to turn back. So they turned their flight around and set a heading back for Greenland, the frozen piece of land where they had just refueled at. Again, as they made their way back, however, their bad luck continued, and the weather was just as poor over this location as well. Now, however, they did not have enough fuel to change plans again, and they were approaching the coast with low visibility and had to find somewhere to land. Soon, through the clouds, they saw a field of ice and made the decision that this spot looked as good as any. So, the 6 P-38s, along with 2 B-17s that had actually accompanied them on their flight, began their approach for the makeshift frozen landing strip. The first aircraft to land was one of the P-38s, and it opted to go wheels down. But after a very rough landing and the pilot barely surviving, the rest of the aircraft decided to go in wheels up for belly landings. Fortunately, all of the aircraft were able to make it down, and all of the crew members and pilots survived. This group of American airmen would actually be stranded in this icy tundra for days, but were eventually able to be rescued and finally treated like celebrities when they made it back. And although this seems like it would make a great resolution to this tale, this is not where the story ends. Due to the location of the aircraft, all of the P-38s as well as the two B-17s were listed as unrecoverable and left in the field of ice. The war would carry on and the warbirds would be subsequently covered by hundreds of feet of snow and ice as the years dragged on. Eventually, any trace of these famous aircraft was lost to time and no one had laid eyes upon them for 50 years. But then, in 1992, that would all change. Here, a group of aviation enthusiasts had arrived in Greenland with a simple goal: find and bring back one of the P-38s from the lost squadron. After all, since they had likely been locked in ice this entire time, they would likely be very well preserved. So, after many days of looking using GPR equipment to attempt to find the planes buried deep within the Greenland ice, they finally found something. Here, at an incredible 268 feet below the surface, the team located one of the famous P-38 fighters. In the coming weeks, they began an absolutely incredible process to attempt to reach the aircraft by melting the ice all around and above. Then, finally, once reaching the aircraft, they disassembled the entire plane before raising it all the way to the surface, piece by piece. After more than a month of painstaking recovery efforts, the team had miraculously gotten every piece of the P-38 to the top of the ice. They made sure to celebrate, but then it was shipped back to the United States because their work was not yet done. Appropriately, now that she had been raised back to the light of day, this P-38 was given a fitting new name: Glacier Girl. For nearly 10 more years, Bob Cardin, the leader of the project, began to restore Glacier Girl piece by piece. After hunting down thousands of parts and restoring as many of the originals as he could, eventually a beautiful aircraft took shape. The project would be completed in 2001 and Glacier Girl was totally restored. In October of 2002, for a crowd of over 20,000 in Kentucky, the famous Glacier Girl took flight for the first time in over 50 years. Once lost to the icy depths forever, this beautiful warbird had been gracefully returned to the skies where she belongs. Thanks for watching. Please consider subscribing.